Hi there, everybody. I'm Leah.
And I'm Mike.
And we are about to take a couple of days look at our art section for this month of May as we are going to go dark.
Yes.
We're going to look at some work from Bruegel and Picasso, two different painters from very different periods of time, and a lot of skeletons. And we're doing this in May. We're not doing this in October, so it's kind of a surprise, I guess we'd say.
Oh, you would think it would be more appropriate for Halloween time.
Well, this is Bruegel, yeah.
Yeah, that is true. And a lot of these are sort of nightmarish scenes, the kind of things you might associate to Halloween or see in a haunted house. But these are very famous paintings that I assume are both hanging in galleries or museums in Europe. Although
must be, right?
Don't ask me exactly where. But yeah, so often when we think of paintings, we think of lovely things, right? The Mona Lisa's lovely smile, maybe some of Monet's beautiful lilies floating in a pond. But art can also be dark and depressing and possibly even scary. So we're going to be looking at some of these very famous paintings. One of them is more of a sort of fantastical creation of the imagination, while the other is one rooted in a very sad, tragic, actual historical event. And they both come to us from artists who I think most people will be familiar with the names, if not these specific paintings. But it should be interesting, but not exactly the most cheerful and uplifting topic.
Unless you like skeletons and scary scenes in your paintings, because there's something a little bit different.
And of course, Munch's The Scream is a pretty depressing picture when you think about it, but it hangs on a lot of walls of bedrooms and stuff. Although I would be a little surprised
I would not put that in my bedroom.
I went into your home and you had the first painting, The Triumph of Death, hanging over your living room sofa.
Nope, not going to go that far.
You'd be an interesting person, but maybe slightly scary.
All right, everybody, let's take a moment and listen to the whole article through one time. In the history of art, few paintings have captured the darkness of human existence as powerfully as Peter Bruegel the Elder's The Triumph of Death and Pablo Picasso's Guernica. Although emerging from vastly different contexts, these masterpieces share a common thread in their portrayal of human suffering and destruction. Both works continue to move viewers deeply, standing as monumental achievements in artistic expression. The Triumph of Death, painted around 1562, represents Bruegel's vision of an apocalyptic world where death reigns supreme. In the scene, an army of skeletons marches across the land, bringing destruction to all in their path. The level of detail is extraordinary. Kings and peasants alike try to flee, while the skeletal army shows no mercy. Some victims attempt to fight back, others hide beneath tables, and still others kneel in prayer. But death spares no one. In the foreground, skeletons drag the living into coffins, while others play music, creating a horrifying orchestra. A large skeleton on horseback sweeps through the scene with a scythe, cutting down anyone in its path. The painting's composition draws the eye across multiple scenes of horror. Burning ships sink in the distance, gallows stand atop hills, and fires rage across the landscape. Bruegel uses warm colors in the background to create an eerie contrast with the dark and haunting scenes in the foreground. The painting reflects the collective fears of 16th century Europe when the population faced threats from plague, war, and religious conflicts. The painting's timeless quality increases its impact. The scenes of suffering could easily represent any period of conflict. So let's dive right in. We're going to look at art, and in the history of art, few paintings, not very many paintings, have captured the darkness of human existence as powerfully as Peter Bruegel the Elder's The Triumph of Death and Pablo Picasso's Guernica. This is our dark masterpieces of Bruegel and Picasso title. Masterpieces oftentimes being the big, famous, well-known works by well-known artists or musicians. You can have it be in music and in a lot of different fields of art, But you don't have a masterpiece of science so far as I know, however.
Not so much. It's kind of a creative thing. But yeah, like the Mona Lisa, a lot of people would say was Da Vinci's masterpiece. The Ninth Symphony, that could be Beethoven's masterpiece. And, I don't know. What about Steven Spielberg? Schindler's List?
E.T.
Might be E.T. might be his masterpiece. But yeah, it's generally an artistic creation that people do. And it's often their most well-known, most widely respected, most famous, that kind of thing.
And as Mike mentioned earlier, a lot of times paintings show something cheerful. They show marriage, or they do a portrait of somebody in their prettiest gown or something like that. And so there aren't that many paintings out there in the world that are completely dark. And we've got a couple that we're going to talk about here. So there are a few paintings that have captured the darkness of human existence. Sometimes human existence, the human life, is not so happy. It's not so cheerful. But these two paintings have very powerfully captured them. And they're by Peter Bruegel the Elder. And Peter Bruegel is a Dutch-Flemish Renaissance painter from the 1500s. He died actually at the age of like 39 to 44. They don't know for sure. And the weird thing is that he is the elder at 44. But he is the head of about 4 generations, at least, of famous painters in that area. And he's really, really good at doing these peasant scenes and these beautiful landscapes. And so were his children as well, and grandchildren. And then you've got Picasso, who is completely different.
Yes, a very modern artist, of course, who died not too long ago. I think in the 1970s. Was when he died, or maybe even into the 80s. But of course, a modern artist, we think of Picasso as being that guy who famously turned people's faces into shapes and cubes and squares and, did a lot of cubist, very kind of modern art. So we'll get to Picasso and his famous work actually in tomorrow's article. We're going to focus more on Bruegel. It says, although emerging from vastly different contexts, these masterpieces share a common thread in their portrayal of human suffering and destruction. So, of course, Bruegel's painting around, the year 1500, Picasso's painting in the 1930s and 1940s, so less than 100 years ago. These are vastly different contexts, or we could say they lived at vastly different times. Vast is just a word for big or huge or massive. Russia is a vast country. It's very, very big, almost too big for our minds to understand, like space is vast. So when we say something is vastly different, it's like saying it's really, really, really different. It's hugely different. It's greatly different. These guys were separated in terms of life by 400 years. The worlds they lived in were very, very different. So they're coming from very different places with very different time and history and influence. But these masterpieces share a common thread. They share some common ideas in their portrayal, or in the way they show human suffering and destruction, right? So 2,000 years ago, you could have been killed by the exploding volcano near Pompeii. That killed people back then. 1,000 years ago, Attila the Hun could have come and burned down your village. 500 years ago, who knows, the Black Death could have killed you and everyone you know. And these days we have world wars and, pandemics and stuff. So suffering and destruction, although they're different, have always plagued people. People have always had tough times. People have always died. There's always been disasters and war and all sorts of terrible things like that. That's the suffering, the destruction. When things get destroyed, we talk about destruction. It can be man-made, as in bombs falling from an airplane, blowing up a city like World War II style, or we could talk about earthquake destruction, or the destruction caused by a typhoon or something, buildings being knocked down or shaken until they fall apart, and of course the death and the injuries and the suffering that result from that. In other words, no matter when you've lived, there's always been lots of ways to have a terrible experience and possibly die. This is cheerful.
That is very, very cheerful.
Yes.
Both works continue to move viewers deeply. So even today, 500 years after the one, almost 500 years after the one was painted, people are still very moved by them. They feel big feelings when they see these paintings. And they are standing as monumental achievements in artistic expression. Monumental here just meaning like grand, giant, really big. So big you practically want to put a monument there and mark it because it's worth noting, it's worth being mentioned. The triumph of death, painted around 1562, represents Bruegel's vision of an apocalyptic, that's a hard word to say, but fun, apocalyptic world where death reigns supreme. Triumph means to win, right? So when you win over somebody, you triumph over them. So here, death is winning. And when he painted it, Bruegel was showing his vision, the way he sees the possibility of an apocalyptic world, apocalyptic being kind of the end of the world as we know it. It is the great apocalypse is the end of all time, whether because of a religious destruction or a political destruction or an alien invasion. Something could cause an apocalyptic world where everything is just kind of falling apart and collapsing. And in this world of Bruegel's vision, the way he views it, death reigns supreme. So death is in the big boss's driver's seat. To reign here means to rule, to be held in the top position, and supreme means it's the highest, it's the best, it's the top. So death is winning, death is triumphing, and is coming to get you.
That's right. No matter who you were, if you were the king of France or the Pope in Rome, death would still be more powerful than you. Death can conquer all, especially, during times of war and destruction or, natural disaster. So let's actually look at the painting itself. It says in the scene or, at what we see in the picture, in the painting, an army of skeletons marches across the land, bringing destruction to all in their path. All right. Yeah. So if we're watching a fantasy movie, and it's our hobbits and our heroes, fighting against an army of skeletons. Ooh, that's exciting because the good guys will probably win. But if you looked out your window one day and an army of skeletons was marching down the street, killing everyone they come across, this would be one of the most terrifying things you could possibly imagine. Very much apocalyptic, the end of the world, clearly. And skeletons, well, traditionally, I should say more scientifically, a skeleton is basically just all the bones that make up a creature, an animal, or a person's body. So often in the corner of a doctor's office, they might have a skeleton hanging there, and the doctor can point to each bone, and if the doctor's any good, we'll know the names of the bones. And of course, we often see skeletons used as decoration at Halloween in a haunted house or something like that. Or, scientists, if they're digging in the ground, they might be very excited to find a dinosaur skeleton. So this wouldn't be just one bone from a creature. It would be most of the bones to kind of be able to almost recreate the body and see the engineering and the structure of the living creature. Obviously, certain things like snails, they don't have a skeleton. Certain animals do, certain animals don't. But imagine this, these sort of bones have come to life. And it's like people with no skin, no muscle, just the bones. And they're marching across the land, just like an army, bringing destruction. That's kind of bringing death to all in their path. That's a terrifying scene. And it says the level of detail is extraordinary. So this is a very large painting, but there's many little scenes kind of going on. It's almost like a giant comic book in some way. You can look at each corner, each section, and see a little scene, a little different thing happening no matter where you look. And the level of detail, there's a lot of detail. Things are painted very clearly and carefully, but also in a small scale to fit a lot of things in. But we see things like kings and peasants alike try to flee while the skeleton army shows no mercy. There you go. Remember, death reigns supreme. So kings, the most powerful people and the wealthiest people in the country, they're dying, along with the peasants, who would be the poorest people in the country. Peasants are something we don't really have anymore, but these would be very poor people. They would probably live in the country, and they would probably be working the land as farmers, but not on their own land, maybe working for someone else or renting their land.
From the king, probably.
From the king or the local lord or, local powerful landowning person. And peasants would basically have just enough money and food to feed themselves, with maybe a little bit left over to sell for cash. But really some of the poorest rural farm workers. And as I said, with, modernization and factories and cities, Most peasants moved to the city to get a better, safer job.
Now, we're right in the middle of this description of this painting, but before we go any further, let's take a break right now and listen to our Chinese teacher.
Hello everyone, 我是派老师。今天讲解的是5月5号 Unit 3 The Dark Masterpieces of Bruegel and Picasso。要介绍的呢是2位伟大的画家作品，分别是布勒哲尔还有 Picasso。这个单元呢有2天的课文内容。那这2位画家分别呢出生在16世纪的文艺复兴时期，还有呢就是20世纪的西班牙。那第一位画家布勒哲尔，他的出生地是在现在荷兰、比利时一带，而第2位画家 Picasso 呢，则是在20世纪的西班牙。这个单元谈的2幅作品呢，分别是《死亡的胜利》以及《格尔尼卡》。好，那我们现在就一起来看学习重点吧。第1天的课文呢，先看到的是布勒哲尔的《死亡的胜利》。请看第1句 In the history of art, few paintings have captured 这个句子。再次提醒同学，这个 few 几乎是少到呢快要没有，所以整句话的意思是说，在艺术史上很少有画作可以像后面我们所讲的这个布勒哲尔他的《死亡的胜利》，还有呢就是 Picasso 的《格尔尼卡》一样。好，那我们来看到第2个句子，为什么这2幅作品呢这么样子的特别呢？好，请看第2个句子 Although emerging from vastly different contexts。 好， These masterpieces， 请注意这个句子呢其实是副词子句的省略。我们可以看得到 although 它所引领的这个副词子句里面是没有主词的，为什么呢？因为它和主要子句的主词都是一样，都是指这2幅呢重要的作品 masterpieces。 好，这2幅其实在这2幅杰作它们的背景截然不同，不过呢却有一个共通点，请同学呢看到后面的句子 share a common thread in their portrayal。 好，这边呢我们讲到这2幅画作是有共通点的，共通点是什么？都在描述人类的苦难还有毁灭。请特别注意的是 portrayal 这个字， portrayal 它的动词呢是 portray P-O-R-T-R-A-Y。 这里呢是名词描绘。再来呢就是请同学看到第3个句子。好，这2幅作品请看到逗点之后 standing as monumental achievements， 请同学把 monumental 画起来。大家应该看过 monument 当作名词用，纪念碑，这里呢是形容词 monumental， 那就表示呢非常重大的，有纪念价值的。那这里呢指的是这2位画家他们的作品是很重大的成就。好，接下来呢请同学看到第2段的第1个句子，要特别注意的是在逗点之后我们看到 where 这个关系副词，请特别注意的就是它所要修饰的是前面的这个 an apocalyptic world。 apocalyptic world 所指的就是末日世界，这是后面这个 where 的先行词。请注意的是 where 这个关系副词它后面所加的是完整句，不缺主词也不缺受词。好，再来请同学看到第2个句子最后面的介系词片语 in their path， 这个 their 所指的当然就是前面的骷髅军队。好，那 in their path 是什么意思呢？就是指这些军队他们所经过的地方，那完全都受到了毁灭。再来请同学看到第3个句子 Kings and peasants alike try to flee。 flee 这是一个重要的动词，指的是逃离。
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back. So we're right in the middle of this painting, guys. We're looking at this triumph of death from Bruegel, and the peasants and the kings around they're running around and they're running away and they're trying to get away from the skeletal army. And if we follow on, some victims attempt to fight back. So like Mike was saying, in different areas of the painting, you can see little kind of almost like a comic image of what's going on. And here's another image. Some victims attempt to fight back. So some areas have people fighting back and trying to hit these skeleton soldiers that are attacking them. And then another area, you'll see others are hiding beneath tables. So they're hiding under tables to keep away from these skeletal soldiers. And still others kneel in prayer. So sometimes, you're like, okay, I can't run. I can't fight. I'm going to pray that God will help me and not get me killed. And the problem is what the rest of the sentence says, but death spares no one. Death is not letting anybody get out of jail free. Death is going to come through and take out everyone. A lot of times when we think about spare, you think about spare some change or spare some time. But this spare is to, let somebody live. So if you spare someone's life, you let them live. You let them live another day and let them go on. You can also have a spare tire if you need one for your bicycle. But in this case, there's probably no bicycles around. In the foreground, skeletons drag the living into coffins, while others play music, creating a horrifying orchestra. So all these little scenes that Mike was mentioning earlier, there are some in the background where you see the ships in the background we mentioned in the beginning. And we have in the foreground, so in the front, in the really the front area of the painting. So if you were looking at the painting, you could practically touch it with your finger because it's so up close and near you. The skeletons are dragging the living into coffins, coffins being the containers made out of wood, made out of metal, sometimes made out of stone, where dead bodies are placed when they are buried. Sometimes in the ground. If in stone, a lot of times there might be left above ground, while other skeletons are playing music, and they're creating a horrifying orchestra, terrifying, shocking, something that fills you with horror, is that the skeletons are making music. They are in an orchestra, an ensemble group with like string instruments and, flutes and drums maybe. And they're playing music together. An orchestra historically could also have been like that space in the front area of a theater in Greek plays, where the chorus would sit there and say their chants when it was their time to talk. Or in Roman plays, there would be the chorus, the orchestra area, where the wealthy or the important people would sit.
And of course, it creates a scene which is very, very disturbing because as people are dying, other people are providing music for entertainment. It's something that doesn't really make sense or seem right to the human brain. I mean, it's kind of like in Titanic when that band is playing music as people jump off the boat to their death. And I mean, they're trying to keep everyone calm, but there's just something really dark and sad and disturbing about, this idea of entertainment at the same time that death is going on all around you. And the nightmarish vision continues. It says a large skeleton on horseback. Of course, the skeletons in this painting are symbolizing death. Large skeleton on horseback sweeps through the scene with a scythe, cutting down anyone in its path. I wonder if that's the first depiction of death carrying a scythe, which is a very familiar sort of way of showing death. We call that character actually the Grim Reaper. That's Grim, grim for sort of dark and scary, and reaper, R-E-A-P-E-R, because to reap is to use a scythe, that long-bladed farming tool, to basically cut down grass in large numbers. Before they had machines like, grass cutters or harvesters or something, a scythe in the hands of a very skilled peasant or farm worker could cut down grass very efficiently using its long, sharp blade. And in the same way, and I think maybe some of these images first came along with, plagues like the Black Death in the 1300s in Europe, killing large numbers of people very quickly was often sort of portrayed as this idea of death with a scythe, the same way that a peasant would cut down large numbers of, grass stalks in a field. Death comes along with his deadly scythe and cuts down large numbers of people, killing them, in other words. It says the painting's composition draws the eye across multiple scenes of horror. And here we get some examples. Burning ships sink in the distance. Gallows stand atop hills, gallows for hanging people, those wooden frames that people get hung from. And fires rage across the landscape, really a hellish, nightmarish vision. And this is in the composition when I described it as being sort of cartoon-like, or as you can see, it has many different things. It's not just one central figure in the middle with a few other things around. That's a later style of painting or composition. This is more of a medieval type of style. And yes, they often had different things going on, not one area of focus. Composition is basically how the artist chooses to frame the picture, right? What is the main thing that I want you to look at? Is there one thing in the middle? Are there two things on either side, kind of balancing each other? If you've ever taken a painting or a photography class, composition is a big part of it. Sometimes you'll see artists kind of holding up their fingers almost in a square shape as they look at an image. It could be the sunset on the horizon or a flower in a garden. And they're kind of thinking, should I put it in the middle? Should I have it more in the top right, bottom left? That kind of idea. That's the composition, the way the objects in the picture or painting are positioned for us, the viewer, to see them.
Right, and so again, the gallows are atop hills, which just means they are on top of the hills that we were mentioning earlier. And Bruegel uses warm colors in the background to create an eerie contrast with the dark and haunting scenes in the foreground. So not only does he have all these little images dotting here and there with all these actions going on and all these different things to catch the eye, he's also catching the eye and affecting the audience by the way he's using his colors, right? He uses these warm colors. You're like, oh, this is so warm. This is so interesting. But wait, it's kind of creepy. Why are we putting something warm with this cold, scary, eerie action? Eerie here meaning creepy, right?
It's true. If it was like black and white and gray and red, it would have a much scarier feeling to it right away.
Yeah.
But by having these sort of normal natural colors, but then we see all the horrible things going on, it is even more upsetting or eerie. You're right.
I guess it's the way that, human life is going, existence is just going on its normal pattern. And then suddenly this horde of skeletons attacks and you've got an apocalyptic moment. But yeah, so you have that contrasts with the dark and haunting scenes in the foreground. Haunting, you think about haunting when you have a ghost in your house, it might haunt you. It would show up and go, boo, right? That's a haunting. Or it might do things like move things across the countertop or something like that. But here, haunting is talking about something being kind of disturbing or distressing in a way that sticks with you and kind of creates an image in your head. And so this is a haunting scene these are lots of different haunting scenes that are in the foreground. They're going to stick with you. You're going to go home, after looking at that painting and go, that's really disturbing. And when you go to sleep that night, you might dream about it because it haunts your dreams. The painting reflects the collective fears of 16th century Europe when the population faced threats from plague, war, and religious conflicts. So if your painter was feeling dark and feeling like the world was kind of coming to its end, then painting an apocalyptic painting would be a great way to show that the wars that are going on and the religious conflicts that are going on are going to cause lots and lots of damage to the world around you. And the plague, here with plague, we're talking about an epidemic with normally a high mortality level. As Mike mentioned earlier, Black Death would have been one during the time, spread by, I think they said fleas on rats, but there's been discussions about that. But yeah, I mean, he's painting a dark painting of a dark moment that doesn't really exist. It's very fantastical, but it's very haunting and disturbing and eerie.
Yeah, I guess today it would have nuclear bombs exploding in the background and, environmental destruction from global warming in the foreground and that kind of thing. Just so the fears and the terrors of the people of the time very, very well portrayed. It says the painting's timeless quality increases its impact, right? We have different things maybe to be scared of today, but plague, war, these are still big issues. These still could kill lots of people or maybe even all of us. So these are timeless issues, right? Something that doesn't matter when you were born. It still touches you. You still understand it. And the scenes of suffering could easily represent any period of conflict. That's true. The clothes will be different. The boats in the background will look different, but the fears, the terrors are very, very familiar to us even today.
Someone who will give us no sense of conflict? Our Chinese teacher. Let's listen now.
好，我们紧接着看第二段， 后面还有3个句子，请同学注意的是第4个句子，这里有 some， 逗点之后有 others， 在逗点之后呢还有个 and still others。当我们要对一群人，那分别呢去述一述有些人怎么样，另外一些人怎么样，还有一些人怎么样的时候呢，在英文当中很常看到这个句型 some, others, and still others。 再来请同学看到的是第2段的最后一个句子 A large skeleton on horseback。 那请同学呢把 on horseback 画起来。一般而言我们说骑着马的什么，那这里呢是有一具骷髅，它怎么样？它骑在马上，所以我们说 a large skeleton on horseback。 好，再来请同学看到第3段。第3段呢让我们更进一步的了解画作里面到底有哪些场景，它的构图是怎么样的。其实这幅画作里面有很多可怕的场景，分别是 burning ships， 再来呢就是 gallows， 好，还有什么呢？ fire。 好，有3个场景哦。那不止，当然这里文章所指的呢是这3个场景很重要的场景。那我们请看到最后的这个场景 Fires rage across。 我们知道 fire 就是大火，那要搭配什么动词用呢？这里作者所使用的是 rage。 我们知道说 rage 当作名词的时候呢是愤怒，所以其实非常的好记哦。那我们常常都会觉得说大火无情嘛，好，那 fires rage， 那无情很生气的时候，就像呢大火蔓延开来，大火呢在大地上肆虐。再来请同学呢看到的是第2个句子。第2个句子呢这里讲到布勒哲尔 Brojo， 他其实非常的善于去运用不同的色调。这里他利用了背景当中的暖色调，那跟前景里面比较黑暗的来形成一种对比。请同学注意到的，作者所用的形容词是 eerie， 就是非常可怕的、诡异的。好，所以 an eerie contrast， 一个很诡异的对比。再来请同学看到第3个句子这边。好，第3个句子告诉我们整幅画想要传达的是16世纪的欧洲，他们所恐惧的，所有欧洲人所恐惧的到底是什么？ Plague， 瘟疫， War， 战争，以及呢就是宗教之间的冲突。好，以上就是我们针对这个单元第1天课程内容所做的中文讲解，谢谢大家。
All right, Bruegel was fascinating, but I'm curious now to find out what's going to happen with Picasso. If you are too, Mike, are you?
I definitely am. I want to hear about all sorts of things that were terrifying him less than 100 years ago.
And we'll check them out tomorrow. So please come and join us again. For English Digest, I'm Leah.
I'm Mike.
Take care.